Let's take a look at tonight's top stories. The federal government is weighing up a tax raid on property investors by restricting negative gearing to just 2 properties. Negative gearing, of course, is the process of claiming losses associated with investment properties on your personal income tax. The Treasury is now modelling what a restriction could look like. At the moment, you can negatively gear an unlimited number of properties. Treasurer Jim Chalmers today refused to rule out changes to negative gearing.
The process of informing our deliberations and our discussions, the Treasury from time to time will canvass a whole range of ideas. That's not unusual in February for a May budget. No decisions have been taken in any of these areas. We've already got a tax policy and a housing policy which is designed to address some of these intergenerational issues that people are right to raise with us. Any next steps beyond that would be a matter for Cabinet.
Apologies about before, by the way. I had a frog in my throat. These things always happen at the most unfortunate times. Anyway, we're not talking about an inconsequential change here. More than 2 million people in Australia own an investment property. More than 1 million of them negatively gear their properties, and I will declare that I am one of them. Now, to be fair, about 90% of property investors own 1 or 2 properties, so the vast majority wouldn't be affected by this change if it happened. But the reality is it's not just about the property investors. Obviously, it puts a ceiling on the portfolio that mum and dad investors could have. Say you've got 3 units and that's your superannuation. They're negatively geared. You couldn't afford to hold those properties if you had to absorb the loss. So this comes in, you offload one of your properties. And presumably this is the theory behind the idea. Property investors can't afford to own properties unless they're negatively geared, so they're forced to sell properties, which then floods the market to bring prices down and get first home buyers into the market. But just a few problems with that. Where do these mythical first home buyers magically get the deposit from? If they couldn't afford to buy a house yesterday, it's highly unlikely they'll be able to afford to buy a house tomorrow. So who buys all these properties? Well, the only option really is even wealthier investors who can afford to absorb the loss in the short term to reap the capital gain in the long term. So you could effectively end up with the greatest policy of wealth redistribution ever, from the average and mildly wealthy to the super wealthy. Great idea. And what about the renters? If properties disappear from the rental market en masse, that will naturally drive up rents because the market will be squeezed. So it's the poorest and those trying to scrounge together a deposit to buy their own home who will be hit the hardest. And what's the option if you want to keep the property but it now has to turn a profit or at least break even? Well, you jack up the rent. You make the tenant pay for the losses because that's the fair price of living in the property. Either way, the poorest people will end up paying the most. And remember the last time Labor talked about negative gearing? 2019. Bill Shorten helped Scott Morrison win a miracle election. So surely they couldn't be stupid enough to go there again. But if that's the case, why won't Dr. Chalmers rule it out? Well,